The morning Dad told me this was his last season, he didn't look at me. He was watching the herd move across the east pasture, hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago. Bad back's not getting better, Sav. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I already knew what he wasn't saying. If the operation couldn't run without him carrying half the load, we'd lose the land. Not because he doubted me, because the bank doesn't care how much a father believes in his daughter. I'm 27. I've worked this ground my whole life, right alongside the guys, not to outdo them, just to carry my share of the load. I love the traditional side of Montana ranching, the quiet mornings, the smell of pine, the routine that doesn't change no matter how much everything else does. But Dad brought on 2 temporary hands for the summer, and one of them nearly cost us the whole season. Henry showed up, did his work, and didn't cause trouble. Max was a different story. He came in acting smooth, and once I shut that down a few times, his whole attitude turned. Every mistake on the ranch somehow ended up being mine. One afternoon, I caught him leaving a pasture gate wide open. Half a dozen Angus calves were already drifting toward the breeding herd. Another minute, and we'd spent weeks sorting that mess out. Before I could get a word out, Wade came around the bend in his white Chevy, saw the gate, and swung the truck across the gap, blocking the calves with the length of his own bumper. He stepped out and looked straight past Max at the fence line. "Post isn't gonna set itself, Max. Move." That was it. One line. Max backed off. Wade didn't hover over me or make a show of it. He just had my back, then went back to his own work like nothing happened. Max's resentment kept building under the surface, and it finally broke open during branding week. The corral was loud and dust-choked. I had a calf pinned when Max crowded into my space. "Why don't you let a real man handle that, sweetie?" He grabbed my arm, hard. Across the pen, Wade dropped his rope. His face went flat and still, the kind of still that means something's about to happen. He started toward us, and I caught movement, Dad and the other hands closing in too. I found Wade's eyes and gave him one small shake of my head. Hold. I wasn't going to let Max turn our branding day into a brawl in front of everybody. I didn't yell. I twisted my arm for leverage, used Max's own bad footing against him, and shoved him. He went down hard in the mud, flat on his back. The whole corral went quiet. Max scrambled up, covered in muck, and lunged at me again, but Johnny and Chris stepped in front of him like a wall. Wade reached me a second later. He didn't say anything, just pressed his hand flat against the small of my back for a moment, steady, and gave me a look that said, "I've got you," without needing the words. Dad crossed the pen slow, boots thudding in the dirt. His voice came out quiet, which, with him, is always worse than shouting. "Max, get your gear and get off my land. You're done." Max opened his mouth to argue, took one look at Dad and the rest of us standing there, and thought better of it. He turned and walked off the property without another word. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, but underneath it, I felt something settle, steady, solid, like ground that isn't going anywhere. Nobody was running me off this ranch. For 2 weeks, things went quiet, and I let myself believe it was over. Then, on a dry Tuesday night, the smell of smoke pulled me out of a dead sleep. I was outside before I had my boots fully on. The stables were already burning, flames climbing the roofline, black smoke rolling low across the yard, and the horses screaming inside it. The guys were already moving, Johnny shouting orders, Dakota running for the water truck, Chris hauling cattle toward the south pasture through smoke so thick I lost him for seconds at a time. The wind picked up and shoved the fire a few feet closer to the house with every gust. I ran for the horses, coughing, eyes streaming, when I caught movement out past the barn, near the dry brush line by the old irrigation ditch.
Angry, I ran for the horses, coughing, eyes streaming when I caught movement out past the barn, near the dry brush line by the old irrigation ditch. It was Max, another gas can in his hand, crouched low like he was about to light a second point along the brush to cut off our escape route to the creek. The whiskey smell hit me before I even got close. "Dad! Wade! It's Max!" I screamed it, but the fire ate the sound whole. Nobody heard me over the roar. Max saw me and knew he was caught. He came at me straight on, drunk and furious, no plan to it at all. I didn't try to meet him head on. I planted my feet and held still. This was my land, not his. I knew exactly what sat 2 feet behind his boots, the steep drop of the old irrigation trench, hidden under dry summer weeds. He took one hard step forward, expecting me to flinch back. His boot found nothing but air. He shouted, arms pinwheeling, and went down into the ditch with a thud that knocked the wind out of him.
He was stuck. I didn't wait around to check. I turned and ran back toward the fire. "Dad! Wade!" I grabbed a shovel off the fence line. "Wind shifted!" Dad looked once toward the creek. "Backburn. Move." Wade was already at the water line, digging into the dry dirt, coughing through the smoke. I dropped in beside him. The heat pressed against my face like a physical wall, sparks raining down in gusts, my lungs raw with every breath. For a while, it felt like we were losing ground, no matter how fast we dug. Wade tossed me a rake without looking up. "Stay with me, Sav." We held that line together for 2 hours, digging, beating back embers, refusing to let it take what was ours. By sunup, the stables were gone, burned down to black timber and ash, but the fire line had held. The house was standing. The herd was safe. I leaned against the truck bed, covered in soot, too tired to do anything but breathe. Wade came and stood beside me, quiet, and laced his fingers through mine. Dad walked over last, looking at what was left of the stables, then out at the herd grazing calm in the south pasture like nothing had happened. He didn't say anything about his back or the bank or the season he'd told me was his last. He just nodded once, like he'd gotten his answer. We had a long rebuild ahead of us, money and time we didn't exactly have. But I already knew what this last season together had told me, about the land and about myself. It was still ours, and whatever came next, I was the one who was going to keep it that way.
Well, that's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. I wonder if Max ever gets out of the muck. Anyway, as always, take care. Bye.